Hey now, and how are you doing? Want to welcome you to the next episode of Peace, Love, and Bring a Bat. Man, today we're going to bring my friend Dustin on. First, before we start anything, thank you, Dustin, for your service. He's a vet, a 30-year vet. So we'll talk a little bit about the leadership that he has experienced. We were just talking in the green room, and leadership is not always thrust upon us, but once you start doing a good job, it's thrust upon you. You're voluntold. So how are you doing today, Justin?
I'm doing incredibly well. It's always a great day when I can take an opportunity to reflect on where I was and where I'm at now. And I do that often. So with that in mind, I can't say that I have not done that today because I do that often, and it's been a great day.
Yeah, no, and I think we should. We should be celebrating all the days, even the days that might not be so good, and then also recognizing where we were to where we're at now. And I know you've grown throughout your life in multiple ways, in leadership opportunities, but also creating your own academy. So why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself, and then we can kind of dive a little further in.
Sure, sure. So I joined the military right out of high school, and I left an environment before I graduated my senior year into my own apartment that I had arranged even before I left because I just needed that separation. So the Army kind of became like my father, the mentor. Oh, this is how you do things the right way, and I kind of blossomed in that role because it gave me structure that I needed
Mm.
and a purpose. And I had always joined the military thinking I'm going to use it as a stepping stone, do my time, get out, go to college, as most people do when they join the service. So they want to find a way to get to college because we usually come from not much, and it's just not enough financially to go around to achieve the goals you want. So the military service, coming from a military family, it just seemed like it was the most logical path. And so 30 years in the military, I deployed multiple times to combat zones. As an infantry squad leader, infantry platoon sergeant, where you're on the ground and you're actually dealing with people face to face. So you see the effects of leadership and how you navigate humanity in the most austere conditions that are largely outside of your own control. And so looking at that philosophy, how does the organization approach keeping that balance of protection and yet, you know, what war comes with and what it does to people as far as leadership. And so that's where my leadership academy came from, is because as leader, you always touch the human part of the organization first. So does recovery, right? And so through awareness, through my journey, understanding my trauma, that extends well beyond, combat experience, because we all have, traumatic experiences just in regular life that
Sure.
sometimes compound. And so I realized that you have to start recovery by leading yourself. And we all have leadership skills that we have because we've survived to this point. So we've led ourselves to some point. And that has been my starting point with my transition from understanding the difference between surviving and recovery. And so that's who I am, and that's where I'm at today.
Yeah, no, that and we'll dive into the little bit of the journey, but it really is so important to understand the difference between
Yeah,
all the different stages of that journey, right? So I heard you clearly, like your senior year, you chose to live elsewhere as a decision. So
right.
you knew from early on in your life, based on circumstances, that what you needed, the space that you needed, but also really what you needed for in terms of safety and what would work for you to get you to that
Exactly.
success, to get you to that graduation, to then move on from graduation to the military.
Right. And that's one of the things the military was really good at, especially for young people from conflicted environments, is it does provide this safety first. You may not feel that when you're going through basic training in your advanced schools, right? Because there's some aspects that may make you feel you're unsafe, but you're a completely safe environment. But what it does is it limits all of the distractions that keep you in the unsafe environment first. And then it allows you to stabilize. And that's one of the beauties about basic training is because it takes people with all these different lives, all these different experiences, all these different cultures and expectations and beliefs about people, and it distills it down to how do we survive together in this environment. And so from that, you can grow out of that environment with a more common trajectory where you operate as a team. And that's always what's overlooked about what basic combat training does for military is it takes away all of those distractions and it makes you rely on people. And so you have to invest trust. And
Mm.
and and so again, when you invest trust, how much are you trusting yourself versus other people?
Well, I guess the trust first has to be with ourselves, right? You know,
Exactly. Yeah,
because if you don't trust yourself, you can't start to trust other people. And that's the thing that the military does really well, right? They build a
absolutely.
unit in terms of, knowing who you trust. You might not like everybody. That's not that they can't do. There's no special sauce for that, but it's the trust to know that no matter what, the guy next to you, I've worked with a lot of veterans. I'm not a veteran, but worked with veterans, and that's when you break in for somebody outside, when you're able to break into that closeness, it takes time because
It
all they
does.
do is, they don't. In fact, a lot of the training is not giving you any second guesses. You have to train, the guy next to you, the guy whose shoulder is next to you. You have to trust him. He's in your unit until he's not in your unit, and because of that trust, it's forced upon you. But you all know you're in the same, same boat or the same foxhole, to use just the military metaphor.
Yeah, that's 100% true. And I think if you look across any team dynamic, the most successful teams probably have people that just don't like each other, and that's okay. It's okay. We just don't like somebody else. The difference is when we act on that because you don't like somebody, and that's where we have to understand where the boundaries are at.
Yeah, boundaries is huge because you just have to know, and while you still have a ultimate goal, so not taking it
Correct.
away from the military view of it, working in an office, not everybody's gonna be your friend, but how do you still get to that common goal that we want? Because there's also, like, everybody has the potential to be leaders. But there's also a lot of people who would like to be followers, who don't want to make any decisions. Uh, more, not like you and your wife, who want what are we having for dinner, and nobody wants to make a decision. Somebody eventually still steps up and makes a decision based on dynamics. What do you see as the difference between, like, leadership and people who like to follow? And there's nothing wrong with wanting to follow, right? I don't want to make that sound like, oh, it's a bad thing. Know your strengths.
Well, what you're touching on is something that has been at the heart of my leadership philosophy for a long time is talent management and how do we manage people's talent? Because you're right, some people just they understand the leadership positions enough to know that they're just not fit for those. They'd rather be analyzing data. They'd rather be playing with children on the school playground. There's people just have different likes. But what's common about all of that, whether you're a follower or a leader, is you still have to develop some type of trust within your environment. You still have to trust your leader that you're following, and you have to trust the leader that you're following that's going to make sure that they account for your humanity in the decisions they make.
Mm.
And so there's an exchange of trust constantly happening because even if it's established that you have trust, what we call legitimacy, like this is a legitimate leader, you still have to manage that trust balance. And we all know our environments are going to test that trust consistently.
Yeah, well, that's the whole thing. Is just because you're a leader once doesn't mean that you're a leader all the time, and under different
Right.
circumstances, right? It's that's where the external, by knowing your internal, you're able to handle the external so much differently.
What the difference is, you can always lead yourself.
Sure, right. And that's one of the things that when I work with clients, I'm like, no matter what situation, either personal or external, you can control yourself, and sometimes the change has to be with you. I know with myself earlier, I'd be a little quicker to the handle and go a little crazier, louder than in other times. But now I just sit inside, and people are like, you're leading differently. I go, for sure, because not everybody wanted to hear a yelling, and we tune that out versus making and changing the environment based on our internal things. What are some of the ways that you've learned or you teach leadership through that internal by building up the internal foundations or internal resources?
Well, one of the other misconceptions I think that many people have about leadership theory is that it applies to business environments, and we've kind of discussed how it applies to ourselves. But I never look at leadership as a theory. I never look at it as a concept or a fundamental. I look at leadership as how do you shape the environment that the team is in to create the successful conditions that you want them to have. And so what happens with your team environment is you have five different people that have five different commitment levels to the organization because of competing obligations. They all have a finite amount of energy they can distribute across all these different environments that they exist in. And so they have to determine, am I really going to invest energy into this fully in a way that the leadership is asking me to do? And so building awareness kind of helps you understand who's really willing to fully commit and who's willing to entertain the idea of committing and who's just completely turned off. And we see this with a lot of like therapy work, like therapists understand who's willing to commit to do the work, who's not committed to do the work just yet, right? And so now you have to create the environment as a therapist where the patient now makes the decision based on the conditions. They feel safe, they trust the guidance they're giving. Now they can act on it without repercussions because they feel safe to do so. And so leadership is the same thing as creating therapy environments that you just create safe conditions for people to manage themselves. Because let's face it, they know what's best for them. We don't,
Right.
right?
Everybody has a fingerprint, and everybody knows what they like, even when we're put on
Right.
teams, because some teams thrive under adversity while others fracture under the stress. It's being able to manage that stress. How do you carry those loads, not only in your life, but when you're looking for a common goal?
Yes, and that is one of the most confusing aspects of relationships because, like I said, you may trust somebody, but to what point? And so you have to build awareness to make sure that everybody on your team is fully committed to the same goal, and it goes beyond the commitment. Is do their actions align with the same trajectory through collaboration, cohesion? And when you see those things happening naturally in organizations, you know that collaboration and cohesion, and especially with patient therapist relationships, that you've got traction. And now you go from, oh, there's some motion to movement. Now you're getting momentum. And that's where the real change starts to happen. But it always starts with the individual choosing, but they have to feel safe to do so.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, that's that consistency and that authenticity. If you're saying one thing and doing another, you lose trust and faith in people. But by doing the action over and over again, one time it happens. Twice you start seeing patterns, and we can build
Correct.
on some of those patterns.
That's correct. And pattern recognition is something that humans are just naturally good at. We recognize patterns constantly. We may not understand the pattern, but we recognize there's something there, like intuition.
Yeah, but that was one of those things I'll share with myself. I wasn't good at patterns. I didn't. Now I've learned, patterns in my life for myself, that self-awareness, but also with other people. So when I'm interacting with certain people, even my children, I know the patterns, and I'm like, okay, I know how to manage it differently. So again, it becomes so powerful when you're always being able to recognize the patterns.
Patterns are tremendous. And we know through occupational therapy that we train people to build patterns into their lifestyle, especially if you have ADHD or ADD, where like constantly losing your keys or your wallet or.
Right.
And so you train them to build a pattern through your lifestyle so that way you don't lose your keys, you don't lose your wallet. Um, but sometimes we stop there and because the one time the key's not hanging on the hook where it usually is, the pattern before is, oh no, it's chaos and panic mode. So now we have to retrain that pattern of going into chaos mode to find the keys to step back and think and put yourself back on task. Well, where was the last time I had my keys, and how many times have they been in the refrigerator in the bathroom sink because you forgot you left them there, right?
Yeah. Right.
So so
And recognize your patterns. I mean, that's why so much about pattern building is important because then you don't think about it. It becomes natural. Once you do it enough, you have that neuroplasticity that builds into, you know, it becomes a routine, right? A habit, right? The 21 days creates a
right.
habit and doing it, then you don't even think about it. I mean, getting up in the morning, you brush your teeth. You don't think about it. It's like, okay, it's something I do. It's breathing.
That's correct. Habit, habit, habit. And I was using the term pattern in the context of the conversation, but really what we were talking about was habit building, building those habits. And another thing that people don't understand is habits, you're gonna fall off every now and then. You're not gonna remember to put the keys back on the hook and you're just gonna set them down, but you just gotta remember to get yourself back on task and try again. And I can't tell you how many times over the years, especially, working on my own vehicles because I didn't want to pay $100 for somebody to come over and look at, this little tap I have going on. So he set my tools down at one spot, walk around the truck, and I remember a s- an experience I had at a rest stop in Santa Barbara. We were traveling through California on vacation with my son. We had him for spring break, and we were visiting the sand dunes and Pismo and, those beautiful places up there. And we had pulled over at a rest stop, and I had noticed that one of the tires on my trailer had warped to a wedge. And I thought I better change this. And so, in a frantic hurry, because it was kind of hot outside, and we were in a rest stop on the side of the road that really wasn't too safe. We were a safe area, but people blast through those things all the time when people were changing tires. And so, um, in my rush, I set my keys on the bumper and I lowered the tailgate so I
Mm,
couldn't see them anymore. And all the tools are locked up. I can't get the jack out of the truck, and I'm just panicking, looking for my keys for probably 20 minutes. And some stranger just walked by and said, "Hey, are you okay?" I said, I can't find my keys." And he goes, "Are those under the tailgate there?" I'm like, "Oh my goodness." And so closed the tailgate, pulled my keys off, went about my business. And I remember thinking in that moment, this was my ADD deflection point from my normal pattern where I catch myself with my patterns. I know how to change a tire. Like I do it. I've done it many, many times, especially traveling the way we do. Um, but just that one moment of chaos where I set the keys down and closed the tailgate, instead of staying on path with my triggers and how I manage my behavior, I went off path and then I went in chaos mode. And so I had I had a stranger come over and help me. He didn't realize he had helped me in a way he did. He helped me find the keys, but he didn't help me realize I needed to take a pause. So
right.
I found my keys, and I took my little time out and I recollected myself and my son and I changed the tire and we got on the road. And I think about that moment often, and I actually write about it, and I call it the 15 extra steps where life just throws everything at you, and you just have to take a pause and realize these are opportunities to overcome these challenges. And healing in life through trauma and
Yeah.
recovery is very much the same. You're going to get pepper, so 15 extra steps, and just take that pause to build that safety space around you to make the decisions, right?
It's those pattern interrupts, right? Because that's
Yes,
some of the things that happen, right? When you can't find something, you're always looking for the same solution, right? Even when you can't
that's
find the house,
exactly, yeah,
your keys, I'm sure, again, if you're at you weren't far, you didn't, there's only inside or outside, and
exactly.
there's not a whole lot of places, but because we're so worked up. How do you? So
Yeah.
I know one of the ways I teach people how to kind of calm their mind, right? Slow ourselves down so we can think a little quicker. I use this thing called havening touch, where where we get to relax ourselves using our delta waves uh, through that period. What are some ways that you do that? When somebody's explaining to you, Dustin, I can't, I can't see it, and it's looks obvious, but it's not obvious to them because they're too close to the situation.
That really just depends on the complexity of the problem. I've really been been pretty good at developing ways to explain complex systems in simple language to in a way that people can kind of understand. Like if people think as a systems thinker, they don't go traditional A, B, C, D to get
Mhm.
to the answer. Um, those are traditional thinkers. They go A, blue zebra, Z to get there. And when people finally get to the answer, they're holding a blue zebra, whereas people like me, and so it's a little bit different. So the more I understand a problem, the more I can frame it in something that makes sense to them. But the complex problems, usually I have to give myself space first. First and foremost, I have to give myself space because I understand that my experiences are unique to me. And everything that comes along with that, we know kind of shapes what we call our cognitive bias, how we view things, how we are willing to accept risk within our lives through our cognitive bias. And so a lot of times, the cognitive bias is is developed on a belief of infactual evidence. It's just not true, but it's something that we just somehow believe. And so when I give myself space, I really analyze, do I really feel this way for this reason? Why or why not? And so in that space, I build that clarity and I'm able to understand these more complex problems to what's really not a symptom of the problem, but what's really causing the problem. And that's where
Mm.
I would invest my energy is where's the root problem? Because people come to you with problems all the time.
Sure.
Yeah, well, is it a symptom or is it the problem,
Well,
right?
that was my question. So what's the difference between a symptom versus a problem, right? And we have to handle them differently depending on what it is. Because you have to recognize some of those triggers. Again, using me as an example, I didn't always recognize the things that triggered me, which then became a problem. But then once I recognize the triggers, the problems go away.
Well, here's one that I learned the hard way.
Sure.
Um, the military has a very specific culture. And that culture varies depending on what branch you're in. First of all, Air Force, Coast Guard, Space Force,
Yep.
and being in the Army, it's very just specific culture. And even within the Army, you have subcultures. Being in the infantry, um, there's no time for really emotions. And so you get told blunt force, correct yourself, correct this, we're doing that. And there's not really a lot of options. So you learn how to understand instructions despite how they're being told to you. So if
Hmm.
you're being yelled at, I need you to move over here because you're in a line of fire. Oh, this is really important. It's not that he doesn't like me, it's that I really need to move. And if that communication doesn't happen, the leader then is trained to grab you physically by your equipment and move you where they need you to be because the communication time isn't there to have the debate. And so you understand quickly how to read through the emotion and look for what's the real problem here. Oh, the real problem is I'm in a line of fire and I need to move. And he's telling me that. Um, so in that experience, it helped me tremendously through my career is understanding who's in the line of fire and where is the danger point at in this conversation. Um, and and, and it's not always obvious in the conversation where the danger points are, but just by building awareness, allowing space, those answers come to you. Um, and I really do think that your self-recovery is almost the same way, almost the same way. So understand the message without all of the emotion. So maybe I can distill it down like this. So let's say you go to the doctor with pain in your foot, right? And the doctor says, well, let me prescribe to you this pain medication to help with the pain in your foot. You come back 2 weeks later, well, I feel great when I'm on the medication. The medication's done, I still have this pain. Well, the doctor never took the shoe off the foot to understand there's a rock inside of the shoe
Sure.
causing the pain, right? We're just prescribing all the medication. Well, you're not describing him where the pain is at. Well, it's on the inside of my foot. It feels like something's poking me. The language is different. And so the doctor's not good at going through the emotion part of it to understand, well, what do you mean by pain? Like, what does it feel like? Pain.
Mhm.
And we have the little smile charts, 1 through 10. So, so for me, and when somebody tells me they're in pain, I'm like, well, what's causing the pain? So let's go down that road. Where do you feel it? What does it feel like? Let's investigate it. investigate the pain. Let's look at the area that's feels pain, right? And then you're gonna find the rock. So just by asking questions.
Yeah, I think that's what it is it's asking the better questions. I mean, obviously, if you're in the middle at the first example, when there's people shooting at you, you have to ask less questions and sort of trust
Yes.
those people to, if they're asking you to move, they're asking you to move for your safety and know that trust
Yes.
versus in the second is we're asking better questions because that I guess that's the part of the deal is because all this is human behavior. It's not
Correct.
only it's not just leadership, and leadership becomes this very rigid thing. It's that human connection plays so much of an importance in our resilience, our recovery, and our growth. And that's among the things that you teach, because as a mentor versus in the military when you just do what I say versus a mentor, how I always interpret it is I give you options. Here's the options, here's your resources, and what role does mentorship and understanding the human connection play in all that?
Well, you actually touched at one of the core of my philosophical leadership philosophies is leading is kind of like a pendulum. Every leader has to be able to coach, mentor, and then lead. And those are different skill sets. You know, you coach people in the moment, you coach them on technique, you coach them within the system, you mentor them so that way they can begin to shape their own environment around their own systems. And then you lead them when things are tough and there's friction in your environment. And that's when you transition to leading, you know. And so every leader has to be able to transition between coaching, mentoring, and leading and understanding when's it time to coach, when's it time to mentor, and when is it time to lead.
Mm,
And so I would say just imagine training a batter how to bat successfully at an elite level. You know, it goes beyond eyeing the ball and placing the bat with the ball. It's elbow mechanics, it's hip mechanics. There's a
sure.
lot of fundamentals that go into it. And so uh, leadership is the same way, you know, and you have to be able to coach people through the mechanics, and then you have to be able to mentor them of when you swing, where does your power go? And then what are you thinking about as the ball leaves the bat? Are you only watching the trajectory? Or are you scanning the field to understand where the play is at to decide whether you're moving or not, you know? And so there's a mentorship coach. And then how you approach the game as a batter. Are you wearing the right gloves? Do you have the right equipment? Are you rested and ready and hydrated? And then you have to lead them as people because as a baseball team member, you're not only a baseball player, you're a member of the community. You have fan bases, you have responsibilities and obligations to the organization to lead yourself appropriately as a baseball player. So as the coach, you have to pivot between mechanics of the bat to mentoring them through the play of the game and preparation and how do we recover for the next event and then leading them in game time. Like these are the decisions in crunch time, but also as a member of the community. So every leader has to be able to transition, and there's really not a clear point when to do that. You just have to build the awareness in your environment to know when that's happening.
Yeah, you just gave my presentation, so thanks very much. Yeah, no, with all the baseball references, because obviously, the
Yeah.
funny thing is, I had started with Peace, Love, and Bring a Bat just as the podcast, different from my coaching, and then people are like, "Man, you walk around with a bat," and so I've created, people ask for it, but where one of the things that you had mentioned is once you swing the bat, you have to start thinking, what are you doing, right? Where the ball landed. Pete Rose used to say that as soon as he hit the ball, he knew if he was going to try to go for third versus where he was going to go. He knew where he was running because if you're looking to try to get a triple, especially somebody as slow as I am, you have to think about it at the beginning. You can't kick it into second
Deep
gear.
right, right?
I
Deep
didn't have a
right.
second gear. My first gear and my second gear is sort of the same, but
Yeah.
but it's that planning of what we
Yeah.
do at the when things happen. Once action starts happening, you have to know what to do and what the next steps are, where the next base goes. Is people often struggle with seeing that bigger picture. They only see a lot of times, especially in organizations, their small view of what they could see rather than seeing the larger view.
I
And
think that's probably I'm sorry. I think that's probably largely true, but I also think it's because the information is so fragmented that we receive that it's hard to assemble it. And so elite professionals, whether they're athletes or business strategists, they understand the entire system. Like Pete Rose understands the entire field just by where that ball is landing. Like you said, he decides whether or not he's going to go to third based on where that ball lands, right? But some people overcommit because they don't understand the dynamics of the system they're in. And so they get caught between second and third because they overcommitted. And so under Pete Rose understood his limitations, just like you said, my first and second gear is the same. Like I have one gear and that's high or off. So that's about it. My high gear only runs a little bit at a time.
Right.
That's it. And
And a lot of that is basically information gathering. So you have
that's
to
correct.
know,
Yeah.
right, by asking the right questions. So if you want the team to play, again, double plays or things like that, it's an action together. You can't run to second base if the shortstop thinks you're getting the ball. So there's a lot of different ways to look at that. So well, so I guess it really is. How do you make sure that you ask the right questions? It's easy to ask questions, but to ask the right questions really is where the impact comes in.
Well, the secret is understanding communication. And understanding there's a difference between listening to understand and listening to respond. And there's a difference between responding and reacting. And oftentimes, when people are describing problems to us, we immediately think we know enough about what they're talking about to provide a solution. And so I always tell people, listen to understand, develop a response, and take the emotional reaction out of it.
Mm,
Right? Which is very, very difficult to do. And me being, infantry guy and coming up 30 years in the military, especially as a sergeant major, at the executive level, it's hard. It's hard to do that when that's what the culture you're inculcated in an environment. That's what you know. That's what works. That's what we resort to, right? And so why would you deviate from what works? And so it's very difficult to listen to, understand, and then respond without reacting. And I think when you have achieved some success and understanding the difference, then you can start communicating better to learn how you can ask better questions. Because when you listen and understand, now more details emerge and more clarity is provided to you. You can really understand the details of the context.
gotcha. Yeah, because but it's also asking the right questions, but it's also understanding that like your story from the beginning, that while you became a leader, you needed to do some healing as well. And
Absolutely, yeah.
and I think that's how you started your company, your Polaris Leadership Academy, which leads and works to heal. Could you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, and I often get the the perplexed look, like I don't understand what your leadership academy has to do with recovery and survivor and growth and the leadership academy was kind of a culmination of 15 years of frustration of growing up in a leadership environment that taught you how to lead within a structured system, but it didn't really give you the skill set to touch the people in a way that created a team environment outside of austere circumstances, that really creates that like basic training
Yep.
basic combat training we talked about that. It kind of strips all the noise away. And so what I realized is when you start leading yourself, then you can lead yourself through recovery because now you're controlling your environment. And um, the military, looking back, I had 3 years of time before I really dug deep into to developing anything. I had 3 years to think about why was I successful and why was I not more successful than I was? And I had to take a hard look about
That's a hard look.
now not only how I presented myself as a leader, but also how I acted as a leader, how I treated my subordinates, my team, my colleagues. And everywhere where I met success, what I realized is I was meeting the human element first. And everywhere I failed, I was meeting the industry need first.
Mm,
And that was a huge difference. And the Polaris Leadership Academy was kind of a way like people understand business. They understand how to make decisions. They understand failure, but they understand that how do I lead myself first?
sure.
And so the academy is a way to put yourself out in the community. You start building these relationships with people that have a common leadership agenda that I have this problem, let's fix it together. And it's like an outreach program. And through the academy, we begin to develop networks that go beyond healing. They become a friendship network, a capability network. I know Joe's good at batting and I need some help. Maybe let's give him a call, And so it becomes more of like an exchange kind of a way of what I call paying it forward. And that's where the academy is at. Like, how can we pay these skills forward to people that really need it?
Right. And that's one of the things that I enjoyed when I started looking into your academy, because it's not only becoming a better leader, it's actually becoming a better human. Once we heal,
Yeah,
there's the old saying, once you heal the boy, the man appears. Once you get through, the leader appears, without carrying that extra weight that you don't need to carry, the mental weight and
right.
way we think previously.
That's absolutely right. And the problem people have is they underestimate how heavy that baggage really is, and it becomes
Yeah.
part of the environment. And that's why we start with awareness first. Like, where in my environment can I get rid of some of this weight? And so I have some space to breathe first of all, because you have to be stable before you can go anywhere else.
Right,
Right.
right. You wouldn't walk if the ground's not stable. You would walk more shaky. You have to get
Yeah,
that baseline first, whatever baseline that is for you, and build upon that.
that's correct. And we all have to have a starting point, and sometimes that starting point needs to be reset.
Yep. Well, and that's part of the growth, right? So your starting point,
Right.
well, your starting point is your starting point, right? That's a more finite position, but all the growth and all that the growing parts, there's no definition or timeline. Everybody grows differently. Again, when you
Yeah.
plant seeds, and we're going to go to that in a second, but when you plant seeds, not every seed grows at the same speed, or
Right.
children, right? Even twins, they don't grow at the same speed. They're close, but it's they all become individuals.
Yeah. And that goes back to talent management. We can manage our children the same way we can manage our employees. Like, what are they good at? What are
Yep.
they good at not doing? And and I find myself usually, I don't want to say treating my kids differently, but approaching them differently because they're
Mm.
just different kids, and they respond differently to different things. And that becomes a skill in itself because you certainly don't want anybody to feel like they're treated differently, but they have to,
Well,
communicate
the
it
the
differently.
skill set, and that's how I explain it to my girls. I go, each one of you operates differently. So do I treat you? I don't love you any differently, right? That's
Yeah,
the easy part. But how I react, or the conversations I have, like one daughter likes playing the viola, so I try to talk to her about music. The other daughter likes swimming, so I talk to her about that. You know, they're in different careers, they're at different stages of their lives. I wouldn't ask the same
right,
question, and knowing what question we need to ask, again, better questions really
right.
gets us the right information.
And that's just from being present, right? You're
Yep.
present in your daughter's life. Like I'm present and with all the relationships I have, I'm present and I understand them because I'm there.
Now, as we get closer to the end of the episode, I always ask everybody to come into my magic garden. You've given us a lot of information and a lot of great tips throughout this. But is there one more seed or piece of advice, or one more thing that you think somebody needs to hear about the work that you do?
Um, I would like to say that the work that I do is largely built from my own personal growth. I learned where I needed to grow first, and then I understood where people struggle in growing themselves, and that's where my outreach starts.
Mm,
And so, my advice to anybody is um, work on your own growth first. Work on your own growth first. So once you start getting your own growth, getting movement on that, then you can start looking at how can you capitalize on that? How can I build momentum, and then helping other people. And that's kind of where I'm at. Like I feel like I'm at a point where my growth is continuous, and I can now start helping other people that might be struggling with this exact same issues that I had struggled with for years before I finally took some space and realized that I was part of the problem, you know.
yeah, and that's that last part is really not only is it hard to look at that you're part of the problem or I was part of my problems, but to then say, okay, how do I fix it and
Right.
search for it, right? A lot of people don't even recognize that because that's a huge growth part. I know in the past I wouldn't have looked at it,
Yeah.
and now I almost search to make sure that there's nothing that I'm not missing.
Well, we're often distracted by our successes, aren't we?
Yep. Yeah. And not even our successes, right? The traumas that we lived through that we needed to heal. It's
Yeah.
the filters. I mean, that's why I always say, take off all your filters when you talk about love. It's the love filter is that unconditional. Do you love unconditionally? If not, then it's not love. Then it's a man-made, you know, import. Because again, we love pizza. Okay, you don't love pizza. Unconditionally. No, it can't. It has to be hot. It has to be this. Okay, so you don't love it unconditionally, and and it's the same with the people. Like your kids, you might not like everything that they do. I would imagine. I know, but you love them. That is no question. No matter what they're gonna do, you're gonna love them. You're not gonna be happy
Yeah.
with some of the decisions they make. But that being said, love, that's non-negotiable.
I have several kids that I took in as teens from the foster care system. Two of them are exploring their own journeys because of that. You know, they needed to discover themselves first,
Sure.
and the other two are finding success, and they're in the right path through their own recovery. And the one thing that they all know is no matter what their choices are, I'm dad. You know, and that's if it really comes down to them getting into some serious trouble, I'm there. I'm the first one there. You know, I'm loading up the backpack in the truck and off I go. And
Mhm.
that's the unconditional love. I can't support some decisions, but the love is still there.
Right. Yeah. Again, poor choices are going to be poor choices, and you have to live with those consequences.
Absolutely. Yeah.
How can everybody find you, Dustin?
Well, I do have a website for the Polaris Leadership Academy right now. It's 4pla.org. There you can find kind of a landing page of all things Polaris Leadership Academy, its outreach program, and what it's really designed to do. A lot of things are in development. We're working every day to continue to build the infrastructure that supports the organization. And so, as you come to the landing page and you start to see what we're doing and building, I encourage you to keep coming back and see the success stories that we talk about and people's personal journeys and how Polaris Leadership Academy connects to the outreach for Tranquility Ocean Adventures and what exactly it does. So I welcome everybody to come out there, check it out. And when you get there, check out the Pay It Forward campaign page. It's a way where we can talk about the things that we've either experienced where somebody gave us grace, or maybe we gave somebody else grace or gratitude in a time of need, and it kind of changes their trajectory. And we're just collecting those stories, and I like to hear about how people have done that for somebody else or what has happened to them. I've shared my story, and I welcome everybody to share their story. So um, 4pla.org, that's a good starting point.
All right. Well, we'll definitely make sure that in the show notes, but we'll also hear about it. And I love that pay it forward. That was one of my mentors over the years was Frank Shankowitz, who created the Make a Wish Foundation.
Oh,
And
nice. Good.
he said sometimes we just have to show up. He goes, there's
That's
always a
right.
place to show up, somebody in need, and when you could do that, and that's what I've built a lot of my life off of that. When I was in corporate America, I was blessed to be able to have opportunities and see where I could show up and who needed to be there. I know I've been in a lot of situations food pantries and things like that, where you just show up. You don't, you think it might just be giving out a sandwich, but then you sit down and have a story with somebody, and it made their day, and
That's right.
instilling that.
That's right. And those are the moments we're trying to capture. Absolutely.
Okay, well, we'll talk a little bit more offline about that and see how I can help support some of that as well.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay. So as we round up the episode, well, first again, thank you for your service and thank you for all that you've done to allow us to have what we have here and these type of conversations. So thank you for that.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. It's been a wonderful experience.
Okay, thank you. And for everybody else, as always, I hope you had some knowledge. There was a lot of nuggets during this episode, lots of things that'll make you think. And I hope you have peace and love in your life as a foundation to always reset yourself. And then when you bring your bat, bring those awesome thoughts like Dustin had brought today and be authentic today. Be who you are and hit your sweet spot. Thanks so much.